It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, how the U.S. Postal Service is honoring a Detroiter who was part of the Underground Railroad.
But first up on the show, financial debt can often weigh on people in many ways. The biggest source of it for Americans is medical debt. Recently, governments have been working to remove medical debt for thousands of its residents. Last year, for example, Oakland and Kalamazoo counties partnered with the nonprofit RIP Medical Debt to relieve medical debt for thousands of residents. And 2 weeks ago, Wayne County jumped on that train as it voted to remove medical debt for up to 300,000 residents. Why did Wayne County decide to do this, and what could the consequences mean to residents? To discuss this, we have Dr. Abdul El Sayed here. He is the director of the Department of Health, Human and Veteran Services for Wayne County. Dr. El Sayed, welcome to the Metro.
Nick, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here because this is something that we've been seeing a lot more of, and medical debt cancellation programs continue to be spreading amongst counties, not only here in Michigan, but also throughout the country. Why did Wayne County decide to jump on board this train?
You know, Nick, I want to situate the circumstance here. County Executive Warren Evans understands that nobody takes on medical debt because of a frivolous reason. It's because they got sick. They're worried about their illness, their pain, their loss of function, or even their lives. And we believe here in Wayne County, led by the county executive, that you shouldn't have to be saddled with huge levels of debt that ruin your credit and destroy your financial future because you got sick. And too often, the nature of our healthcare system, so focused on profits rather than the well-being of the public that it supposedly serves, people are facing those circumstances. And it's become a challenge whereby people are worried about whether or not they're going to be able to get the health care they need and what that means for them financially. And so this was an opportunity for us to address the circumstances that 300,000 Wayne County residents find themselves in because of a decision they made about the worry that they had over their health. And they're suffering the consequences every single day and lost financial opportunities for it. We wanted to address it. The county executive recognized this was a real responsibility the county could take on, and we did, and we're really proud of that.
Yeah, and up to 300,000 in people is what we hear in Wayne County could get their medical debt taken care of. Can you let us know why this number is something that you arrived at, and for folks who are interested in it, what the process will be for removing that debt?
Yeah, let me just explain a little bit about the guts of the program so folks understand. We're talking about nearly $700 million of medical debt that this program could wipe out. Now, folks are looking at that and saying, how are you going to pay nearly $1 billion for medical debt? Well, here's how it works. When someone takes on medical debt, once that debt is unpaid, the value of that debt on the debt market, meaning what you can actually get for it, goes down substantially because the probability it ever gets paid goes down so low. And so you can purchase bulk debt for pennies on the dollar. And so what we've done is we partnered with RIP Medical to negotiate with healthcare providers, hospital systems, hospitals, clinics, to buy that debt from them. And it's a win-win-win all around. Obviously, for the individual whose debt is cleared, that's a huge win for them. It's a win for those hospitals and those clinics because that's debt they probably would never have been able to recoup. And then it's a win for the county because think about all of the financial and economic opportunities and activity that's foregone because people have taken on this debilitating debt. And so we saw the opportunity to be able to say, well, look, we have funding made possible by the American Rescue Plan Act from the Biden administration and funding made possible through indigent healthcare funds to take this on. Now, it's not clearing medical debt for literally everybody. It's people who earn less than 400% of the federal poverty line. So for a family of four, that would be about $100,000, or whose debt is greater than 5% of their annual income. And so for them, we are going to enter into a contract on behalf RIP is going to enter into a contract on behalf of the county to buy out that medical debt. And folks who meet those criteria will get a letter in the mail saying your debt has been cleared. And that's reported out to the credit agencies as paid up and addressed. And so it really is an awesome opportunity. The 300,000, that's the estimate of the number of people who meet that criteria.
Yeah, so in Wayne County, from what I'm hearing from you, it looks like you guys are taking care of all the work. If I'm someone who lives here and thinks I'm eligible or wants to try to maybe get eligible for this, you're saying, nope, don't reach out to us. We'll take care of it and you'll find out about it afterwards, or do I need to do something?
That's exactly right. The nice thing about this program is it's operating in the background. Too often there are programs out there for relief, but people don't know about them, right? They don't know that they have to apply or they have to reach out to somebody. In this case, it's all happening in the background for you. We're working hard to try and address and build out those contracts. We've already reached out to some of the largest healthcare providers in the county, and we'll continue to do so. And so it's operating in the background, and you should be getting a letter in the mail. Now, it could take some time. Obviously, negotiating these contracts can take time, but I hope folks will be patient, and those letters will start arriving quickly.
I can already imagine some folks thinking about this from a fairness angle and the fact that, hey, if you have a debt, you're supposed to pay it off. So, for example, if you're someone who did have medical debts, worked really hard to pay it off, versus now there are folks who they might say were deadbeats on their medical debt and didn't pay it off. It's unfair. What would you say to folks who say, hey, I paid off mine, everybody else should have to pay off theirs?
Now, look, I can see how people would make that argument about a financial decision that's arbitrary, right? If you want to buy a car that potentially you can't afford or a house that might be a little bit too big, those are situations where you're not entering that debt obligation from a position of need, rather from a position of want. When it comes to healthcare, by definition, we seek healthcare because we're sick or we're injured or because we worry about the loss of life or limb. And in those situations, people shouldn't have to be strapped down with huge levels of financial debt simply because they did the thing that they needed to do to potentially save theirs or a loved one's life. And so that doesn't really quite apply to this kind of debt. And too often when you're talking about the kind of folks who take on medical debt, you're talking about people who can't afford it. In a healthcare system where we've watched as prices have skyrocketed over time and really nobody's doing anything about it. And so what we're saying is, we are stuck here with a moral dilemma where people literally can't afford their health care and they're facing the choice about whether or not to take on a huge level of debt, potentially lose their life or lose loss of function or get really sick or continue to sustain pain. And if we can do something about that as a community, then that matters. The other point I'll say is when you're talking about 300,000 people who carry this medical debt to the tune of $700 million, that's an albatross on all of our financial opportunities, right? That has an impact on the entire county. And taking that impact down and addressing it is absolutely critical to empowering the county's financial opportunities. So everybody benefits, even if you're not somebody who might be carrying that debt.
Yeah, I like that long-term outlook because you're right? Money that goes towards that or credit hits that affect residents makes their spending power less for all of us, right, in terms of an economic system. But that kind of leads me to this idea that Wayne County, I know, is putting on this program, but I'm talking to you who's involved with the Department of Health. So do you see this financial medical debt as a healthcare issue, or is it just a broader Wayne County economic issue? Where does that fit for you?
I mean, we draw these lines and they're somewhat arbitrary. And, this program is under the leadership of the county executive, Warren Evans, and he recognizes that this is both about health and it is also about the economy. And those two things are often intertwined. When you think about the fact that in our healthcare system, 50% of the medical debt incurred in this country is incurred by people who are insured, it tells you a lot about who feels like they really have sure access to healthcare. And if you don't have access to healthcare, well, that's going to have huge implications for your health. So being able to wipe the slate clean, at least to be able to empower folks to pursue the healthcare that they need when they need it, is a part of making sure that people feel like they have healthcare access. But the other part of this is that that's an economic choice, right? I mean, when you know that getting healthcare comes at the cost of potentially incurring a debt that you may not be able to pay down, that's going to cost you the opportunity to buy a home one day or buy a car, that ties these two together in indelible ways. And so, yeah, I am the healthcare director, but our responsibility is to think about the global health of the people that we serve. And this was an opportunity to both empower people to get the healthcare they need when they need it, and also the opportunity to be able to rid them of a financial albatross hanging on theirs and the county's neck. And so the fact that we could have a twofer here is why the county executive was so motivated to get this done.
Yeah, this makes me think then bang for your buck, right? And you kind of got into this a little bit, but what would you say to someone who would say maybe we should be investing this money then into things that can have more preventative or long-term effects, maybe more nurses or, healthcare facilities or things of that nature, as opposed to just putting money in the pocket of people who are just trying to make money off of debt?
Well, I'll tell you this, none of these dollars are going to debt collectors. They're going to the hospitals and the clinics and the physicians that provided that health care. The other thing I'd say here is that those two things are not mutually exclusive. We're invested in a number of programs to try and prevent illness. We're working on a program to put 100 Narcan vending machines to tackle the fentanyl crisis that we're facing here in the county, so that everybody understands that Narcan is just a part of the first aid kit that all of us should have on us. We're building a network of air quality monitors, 100 of them, to get real-time information to folks so we can prevent asthma exacerbations and long-term lung injury that results from air pollution. So they're not mutually exclusive, but they're all part of a greater whole. And I'd argue that part of the challenge here is that, government-wide, we have failed to really think about the challenges that we face when it comes to the whole health of people as part of a system. So you can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can protect people from the financial circumstances and consequences of healthcare decisions that they have made to keep themselves healthy, while also investing in the means of their well-being in the future. And I'd argue that we need to do both. I'd also argue that some of the things that need to happen can't really happen at a county level. We have a healthcare system right now where health insurance is too expensive. Too many people feel like even if they're insured, they still have to pay too much out of pocket. They're foregoing health care that they need. And that requires state and federal policy. So, if we can demonstrate that this is such a problem and we're invested in solving it at the county level, I hope that it spurs actors who are operating at the state and the federal level to recognize that these are problems they can solve upstream if they're willing to have the political will to do it, and that they're willing to stand up to a lot of the healthcare corporations, the insurance companies that are too often on the wrong end of taking money for healthcare that people fundamentally need.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Dr. Abdul El Sayed, Director of the Department of Health, Human and Veteran Services for Wayne County. Thanks for joining us on the Metro.
Nick, thanks for having me and for covering this.
Coming up, we'll talk about the new service, express bus service route that's running up from Detroit to the Metro Airport. That's coming up right here on the Metro.
This is the Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
And I am Tia Graham. And right now I'm thinking about taking a bus somewhere. Or maybe am I? The Regional Transit Authority of Southeast Michigan, aka the RTA, is currently in the first week of launching an express bus pilot service. The shuttle will connect riders from downtown Detroit to Metro Airport in Romulus. And the service was funded by a $2.5 million grant through the Federal Highway Administration's Carbon Reduction Program. Now, Cori Wofford is the Director of External Affairs for the RTA, and she is here right now to discuss the express route. Cori, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to join you this morning.
Awesome. So what is the new shuttle bus service from Detroit to Metro Airport?
Yes, Detroit Air Express, or what we like to call it, DAX. We've already given the service a nickname, DAX, where we travel multiple times per day, 16 times per day, from downtown Detroit to Metro Airport. The pickup location downtown Detroit is at Washington and State Street, which is just a stone throw away from Michigan Avenue, directly around the corner from the Rosa Parks Terminal. That location will be both pickup and drop off for downtown location. And then we will DAX travels up 94 on the freeway to Metro Airport. There will be two stops at the airport, one at the McNamara Terminal, and then the second stop will be at the Evans Terminal. And then the service just loops back around, and it completes that run multiple times per day.
When I think about such an expansive service, you said 16 times per day. You're doing that loop around Michigan Avenue, around right around the corner from the Rosa Parks Terminal, going all the way to Metro Airport. How long were you all working on this service to make it a reality?
Yeah, so the service came up pretty quickly we were able to get it off and running. Originally, we received funds in 2022 from SEMCOG, who was able to get money through the Federal Highway Administration Carbon Reduction Program. And we were able to secure $2 million in grant funding from that. And just to kind of give you a bigger picture, that grant funding ultimately came down from President Biden's infrastructure plan. Mm-hmm. So the big picture is that it was voted on in D.C. It trickled down to the state. The state was able to trickle down even more to the local area, and that's how we were able at the RTA to apply for those funds. In addition to the $2 million grant we received through SEMCOG, we also received $500,000 in grant funding from MDOT, Michigan Department of Transportation. So all in all, it has given us $2.5 million to administer this pilot project.
So I know it's really early on. The service literally started yesterday, but what have you heard so far?
Yes, so it started yesterday, and I've had the opportunity to be on several DAX runs yesterday.
Nice. Just
talking with individuals, first-time riders, thanking them for really giving us the opportunity to be their transit provider on the first day. You know, it can be a little scary. You're trying out something new for the first time, but everyone said it was a smooth service. They arrived in a good amount of time. There was no anxiety with the possibility of missing their flight. I got an opportunity to meet a lot of different individuals, some locals, some flying into the region, lots of different scenarios with the individuals riding DAX. We got a chance to chat with a family. They were headed to Florida for spring break. There was another resident that was riding DAX headed to DTW. She was just getting away for a girlfriend's weekend in California. And then we were able to also chat with individuals once we picked folks up from DTW, talking with them on why they were coming to the region. A few individuals were here for work reasons, and they wanted to try out the service. And then we just had some folks that were coming into town for leisure activities. So we really got a chance and got a snapshot. I personally had the opportunity to talk with a good snapshot of individuals that were trying out the service. And we believe that really will be the makeup of users of DAX, that they will be commuters. They will be those that are just getting out of town for leisure getaways, or they will be coming into the region for work-related purposes.
Now, Cori, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm thinking about people who are like me, individuals who just love their vehicles, who just love to have their hands behind the wheel, or just love to be in the car. So how is this, or how will you all at the RTA convince people like myself to give up the wheel?
Yeah, well, we're a transportation agency. That's what we do. We plan, we fund, we accelerate, we coordinate. We at the RTA promote transit. So that is the heart of what we do. So we want to encourage everyone to give this a try. I mean, there's a variety of reasons you can opt to use DAX. You just don't want to drive on the freeway. There is the extra added cost of a ride share, which can be really expensive, especially if you're someone that travels to and from the airport multiple times. Those dollars add up. One thing that's really great about this pilot is that we're able to offer this transit option at a very affordable rate, $6 in advance each way, or you can purchase $8 at the actual DAX door. We do encourage individuals to purchase tickets in advance. That just kind of helps us with seating and reservation purposes. But also, we are looking to really reach out to those that work at the airport. And we are offering a frequent rider pass book, which basically boils down to about $2 per ride if you buy your rides in bulk. $100 rides boils down to about $2. So we encourage people to give it a try because we think it is a more affordable option. It saves you the stress and the hassle of driving on the freeway. And there's also an environmental component.
Cori, I want to jump in, and that's exactly my last question to you. was how will this, and this is just a pilot program, and I would love to see that it expands one day, but it's a pilot program. You're just getting started. How will this help you all move closer, or how would it help the state move closer to Governor Whitmer's goal of 100% carbon neutrality by 2050?
Less cars on the road. Simple as that. Our bus has over 50 seats on it. So you do the math. That's 50 less cars on the road. That's 50 less emissions being emitted into the air. So every little bit helps. If we can help to kind of eliminate some of that carbon footprint by offering transit opportunities and options, then we're doing our part and our share to help clean up the environment.
Cori Wofford is the Director of External Affairs for the RTA. I want to say thank you so much for joining the Metro this morning, explaining to us this new service and letting us know what's going on with regional transit.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for having me on.
This is the Metro on 1019 WDET, and the Underground Railroad has routes around the U.S., one of the biggest stations of which was right here in Detroit. Detroiter William Lambert was an Underground Railroad station master helping former slaves achieve freedom, and now he's being honored by the U.S. Postal Service as he'll be on a set of forever stamps alongside 9 other heroes who worked on the Underground Railroad. At a recent event, the local branch of the U.S. Postal Service and the Detroit River Project unveiled these stamps. WDET's Brianna Tinsley sat down with Kimberly Simmons, President and Executive Director of the Detroit River Project, to discuss William Lambert and the significance of Kimberly's family lineage.
The Forever Stamp collection to the Underground Railroad actually includes 10 of our American heroes. Included amongst those 10 stamps is a very humble gentleman that was very quiet about his work, and his name was William Lambert, a free black man, originally born in New Jersey. He was a tailor by trade and a man about town, again, quietly. But in the background, he was in the Underground Railroad lingo, he was the Detroit station master.
A station master, what does that mean?
So he was the one that you looked for if you were searching for freedom. He was the guy. And that Detroit was the terminus, as we say, for the Underground Railroad. If you were looking to find freedom, this was the spot. It was driven by our river and the proximity to Canada. At the time, there are places in the river where it was only knee deep. It was only about barely a mile, not quite a mile, to walk to freedom from Detroit, whose code word at the time was midnight, and to freedom in Canada, as the code words were promised land or dawn.
And you have a unique connection to Mr. Lambert.
I am an Underground Railroad descendant, so I'm 5th generation. My family has been here since 1833. My first ancestor, Alan Watkins, arrived here, escaping across the Ohio out of Kentucky in 1833 with 3 children under the age of 10. He met 10 years later a woman by the name of Carolyn Quarles, who became Carolyn Quarles Watkins, his wife. They're my 3rd great-grandparents. She actually escaped out of St. Louis, and after 1,000 miles was told to get to midnight. That is where she was looking for. And she actually was helped after being chased, literally, to the dock by slave hunters that were looking for her to return her to her quote-unquote owner. The man that rowed her across the river for $12, 12 shillings as it was called, was William Lambert. I wouldn't be here without him.
Did Lambert have any other major contributions? You say he played a big part in the outcome of the Civil War?
In 1858 in May the 8th to be exact, there was a convention, a meeting in Chatham, Ontario. And at the meeting were all the really big-time abolitionists and decided or talked about Harper's Ferry. And of course, the raid on Harper's Ferry is considered one of the movements that actually started the Civil War. And out of that discussion, it was decided they were going to go ahead with raiding Harper's Ferry. Can you imagine? They were planning Harper's Ferry in downtown Detroit, and the man that paid for the guns and for John Brown's army was William Lambert. He funded Harper's Ferry. So let's think about that. How big is that coming out of Detroit?
Yeah.
That is a story that we should know, everyone in the city or everyone in this Detroit region should know, because it caused the end of slavery.
That was WDET's Brianna Tinsley speaking with Kimberly Simmons about the Underground Railroad hero, William Lambert.
Coming up, we'll discuss how Detroit's financial situation got in a more stable place. This is the Metro.
It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
And I'm Tia Graham.
And right now, we've got a great news that we heard about on Monday considering Detroit's financial health. That's right. Thanks to Moody's Investor Services upgrading its bond rating, Detroit now holds an investment grade rating, a status not seen since before the 2009 bankruptcy. Why does this matter, and how might it shape Detroit's future? Here to dive into these questions and more, we're joined by James Tatum, Detroit Bureau Director for the Citizens Research Council. James, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you. Hi, Nick. Hi to you.
Hey, it's great to have you here. You know, when I think back to 20 or 15 years ago, it's a time that we didn't quite know what was going to happen, how long it would take to get out of the morass. But it seems like Monday sounds like a very important day for us in our work out of bankruptcy. Could you just start by explaining for us and listeners what a bond rating is and why this news is important for the city?
Sure. So people, businesses, cities, they borrow money. And no differently than you have a credit score, you know, you're assessed on how much money you make, how much debt you already have, you know, the history, your reliability as a payer. The same is true of companies and cities and any type of debt issuer. And, you know, in the city's case, it isn't Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. It's Moody's, Fitch, Standard & Poor's. In this case, Moody's upgraded the city's credit rating, essentially saying the city is a better risk than it was before.
Yeah. And to correct what I said earlier, the bankruptcy was, of course, in 2013, not 2009. But to get back just into this investment or this upgrade, what does reaching investment grade mean for Detroit as opposed to where it was before? How is this an impact?
So, you know, your reliability as a payer is an aspect of your credit rating. And, of course, when the city filed for bankruptcy, it squelched on some of those debts. It paid back bondholders cents on the dollar that they were owed, and that's a part of bankruptcy. That's the whole purpose of it, to break contracts, and that includes debt. And so even before bankruptcy, you know, there were concerns about where Detroit would be financially. And so those credit rating agencies lowered the city's credit profile continually. And bankruptcy really created a mar on that record, no different than it would if a person or a business filed for bankruptcy. So now that Detroit is investment grade, essentially what it means is there are just fewer worries than if you were to invest in Detroit, let's say, in the period when it was below investment grade. You know, it's the difference between a normal loan, let's say if we were talking about a mortgage, and a subprime loan. Subprime loans were for people who had lower credit scores.
So if we're looking at this, then, you know, we've got long-term impacts we could think about, James, but then short-term, is there any immediate or short-term impact that Detroiters and residents can see from this announcement, or do we have to wait longer-term to really feel the effects of it?
You know, in the short term, part of it's just reputational, and that matters. You know, the health of a city, its finances, its economy are in part encapsulated by a credit rating. In the long term, you know, when Detroit will see a benefit from this is in part dependent when it next issues debt, because that's when this really matters, because the interest rate paid by borrowers is informed by the credit rating that they have. Detroit just issued, I believe, $100 million worth of bonds this past summer. From what I understand, there aren't plans to do more in the near future, but when the city does issue more debt, that higher credit rating will come into play.
Yeah, well, this is good because then getting access to capital, maybe easier access to capital. Of course, there can be restrictions on what people, for example, can use for investment. If you're not investment grade, you might not have access to that capital. So it seems like that would be beneficial for Detroit to not have to spend as much on different interest rate payments and things. But on the other hand, sometimes you might think of austerity, the idea of spending too much. Maybe if you have easy access to capital, you start overspending. Is there any concerns that the city could go back to irresponsible spending now that we've received this rating? How do we have a check on that, James?
So to some extent, how much the city spends is in part decisions made by its elected officials and whether it overspends or not. Whether taxpayers punish elected officials who are unwise with taxpayer dollars. But, Detroit is far from the position it was in at the time it filed for bankruptcy, and this is just kind of one statistic. So in 2013, the city had about 2 days worth of cash on hand. If you just look at how much is it spending per day and then how much cash does it have. As of the last financial statements released for 2023, it has 216 days worth of cash on hand. The city is in a much healthier position, whether you look at the cash it has on hand, the revenues that it receives, and its overall debt profile. The city has far fewer liabilities than it did at the time that it went to bankruptcy, because the whole point of bankruptcy was to break contracts, reduce those liabilities. So I don't see too much of a worry. There are socioeconomic factors that could harm the city, such as a recession. The city is very reliant on income tax, and so unemployment rates hurt doubly because you have people who earned income that was taxed who don't earn it anymore, and then those people are likely to be more reliant on social services that cost the city. So I'm not so worried at present about any kind of backsliding into the days before bankruptcy.
Yeah. Looking back at this decades-long process to get to this point, then, are there any nuggets that you pull out from there, lessons that we might be able to learn, or what sticks out to you from this process?
So what Detroit did prudently after it came out of bankruptcy was that when it would essentially receive a profit, it's not the term you would use in the public sector, but it's mathematically the equivalent, it really stashed it away, and it stashed it away in kind of two primary ways. One was a pool of assets called the Retiree Protection Trust Fund. And so the city restructured its pension payments in bankruptcy. There was a pause in when those payments had to be made. They've come back online in 2024. And so rather than kind of starting from zero to make those payments, the city saved up a lot of money in that 10-year period from which they had a reprieve from pension payments, and they're now spending it down. So there's assets to spend on there. And then they have a separate budget reserve fund, which is, a classic rainy day fund. If there is a natural disaster, a recession, a pandemic, the city doesn't have to cut back as much as it maybe normally would, because it can then spend those monies down. And that budget stabilization fund that it has is approximately, I want to say, 11% of general fund expenditures, which is fairly healthy, and it is over double what is required by state law for the city of Detroit.
So, yeah, we're going to want to keep an eye on this as well then, James, because that is pretty impressive what I'm hearing from you. Just basically kind of responsible spending, getting back into being responsible really helped us out in this decades-long process. You helped us out understanding this. James Tatum, Director for the Detroit Bureau of the Citizens Research Council, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you.
This is the Metro. I am Tia Graham. You just heard from Nick Austin. In 1987, a woman named Anita Wiley disappeared from her Detroit home. Anita's body wasn't recovered until 33 years later, when a first-of-its-kind DNA program matched her DNA with that of her son's, Antonio Wiley. Anita was one of nearly 700 people killed in Detroit in 1987 at the height of the crack epidemic. But what happened to her? And why did it take more than 3 decades to find her body? Tanya Mosley, the co-host of Fresh Air and the co-founder of TMI Productions, has worked with Antonio Wiley to produce the forthcoming documentary, She Has a Name. Before making the documentary, the two found out they're related because Anita Wiley was Tanya's estranged sister. In this conversation, Carrie Jr. and Stephen Henderson of WDET's Created Equal sat down with Tanya and Antonio to discuss why they made the podcast.
Big part of this story is that Antonio and I did not know each other.
Right.
24 years ago when we first met. Antonio was searching for his mom, searching for connection, searching for family, and he found my father, which is Anita's father. And I did not know my father, and I did not know him well. And it was through that connection over the last 24 years or so that Antonio and I have forged a family relationship, a connection. And in 2020, when police discovered the remains of his mother, we were having a conversation and we were talking. He was having news crews approach him wanting to talk about this program where they're able to match with DNA. And he was giving these interviews, but he wanted to tell his mother's story in a more holistic way. And I hadn't considered using what I do to tell her story, in part, Stephen, because I had never been able to tell a story of this magnitude that got really real, got really true.
Yeah.
Like, talked about the messiness of families and disconnection and finding connection and healing intergenerational trauma, you know?
Sure.
Like I had never gone this deep before. And so being able to do that really solidified and has solidified for me the power of having your story be told, the power of storytelling. You know, Pulitzer Prize winning author Isabel Wilkerson has this quote where she says, "You can't escape trauma by ignoring it. You only escape trauma by confronting it."
Wow.
And we all have protections that we, as I mentioned, that we like walk through the world to protect ourselves, to protect our emotions, to keep it moving. Because, you know, sometimes when you sit in really devastating things and traumatic events, you know, you feel like, I mean, I may never get up if I really face it. But truly, it's true that facing it, talking about it, can be tremendously healing. And I think that we found that through this process, and also hearing from people who say, just listening to it makes me feel seen, makes me feel affirmed. So that's the start.
So Tanya, talk more about these early moments when Antonio brings this to you, and you know, there's a number of different things he brings to you, right? Things that you didn't know or things that you didn't understand. Talk through the process of just trying to make sense of it and decide, like you said, to face the trauma and confront it and work through it. How did you get to that space?
Yeah, you know, it's been a slow process. Antonio did not reveal to me everything from the start, which we don't. You know, we don't do that. You don't lead with the most traumatic thing that has ever happened to you and the dirty details of those traumatic things. So when Antonio found me in the early 2000s, I knew that a sister that I didn't know, Anita, had disappeared, and she was his mother. And I was devastated by that because I didn't have a sister growing up, and I always dreamed of it. That was the ironic part, is like I always yearned for a big sister. And so before I could even get excited about that, I learned that she was missing. And it was likely because it had been so many years that something bad had happened. But Antonio, it was a beautiful gift to have this nephew who immediately, there was so much about him that reminded me of myself. It felt like a connection that I had been yearning for my whole life. in part because I also didn't know the other side of my family. I didn't know my father's side at all. And Antonio, over the years, has given me like little bits of information, little bits, but I didn't know the whole story until they discovered her remains. And really, Stephen and Antonio, you could step in here to talk more about this, but through the making of this podcast and talking to other family members, was I able to piece together Anita's life.
Wow.
And so while I had this deep connection with Antonio, I now am like forging a relationship with the sister I never knew through the details of her life. And it's extremely powerful. It's extremely bittersweet. But I feel like being able to talk about her gives her life meaning, because there's so many people in this world who we will never know, but whose lives have meaning.
Sure.
She has a name. She's not just an unidentified person in a grave. That's just been extremely powerful.
Yeah. Antonio, when you started all of this, what was your hope for what you would learn about your mother? I wonder what your frame of mind was when you got into what you had to know was going to be difficult.
Yeah, it was painful. I didn't really have an expectation other than finding her.
Mm-hmm.
That was the focus. But then over the years, reality check and wanted to, at the same token, find her, but then also find answers. So it broadened the scope a bit. Had some conversations with law enforcement back then, who kind of gave me some encouragement to keep digging. But then as I unpacked some of my research and things like that, I realized, like Tanya alluded to, the lack of documentation and the lack of record keeping from my own search.
Mm-hmm.
So the questions just grew, the cause grew, so to speak. But then the main focus was still for me to find my mom and get answers.
She has a name, the 10-part documentary podcast from APM Studios. It will kick off March 28th. That is this Thursday. This is The Metro. Coming up, we'll discuss whether it matters to Republican voters if Trump is found guilty in any of his legal cases. Welcome back to the Metro right here on 1019 WDET FM. I am Tia Graham. Nick Austin is right here with me.
That's right, Tia. And I don't know if you know this, but former President Donald Trump is in a lot of legal trouble right now.
I knew that.
But despite all the indictments that he's faced, a lot of people are wondering, does it matter at all if he's found guilty, and will Republican voters care? Well, NPR's Leila Fadel spoke with GOP strategist Rina Shah about whether a conviction would hurt former President Donald Trump's chances of being reelected.
If Trump is convicted in the hush money trial, what do you think the political fallout might be?
I believe it would be intense because this is the one trial that is distinct in nature. It is the one that I think could have the greatest impact on public perception as well as the outcome of the election. If we see a convicted felon in the former president of the United States, that does stand to change the minds of many Republicans who have stood by him and given him the support that feels as if it's been unshaken for the past 4 years. But there is a larger swath of Republicans out there that have proven in these early primaries and certainly in the thick of primary season while candidate Nikki Haley was still there, that they may want someone else. And so again, the result of what happens in this criminal hush money case, again, to me is very different than what could take place in Georgia, Florida, or even here within the District of Columbia.
What makes this one so distinctive compared to the cases around classified documents or the election January 6th?
simply put, this one has less complications and drama around it. Now, yes, it does involve a former pornography actress, but if you're looking down at what just happened in Atlanta with the Fulton County District Attorney, Fani Willis, from January up until just last week, we saw her essentially be put on trial. So again, this was a case in which it became rather disheartening for a lot of those folks who felt that this was a strong case. Again, racketeering charges brought by that DA against Trump. That trial will continue. Everything there, Fani Willis is saying, is untouched and they're still ready to go. But the public perception there has been somewhat changed. And again, also in Florida, when you're looking at classified documents, we just saw a special counsel Hurd on Capitol Hill talking about the classified documents and Joe Biden. So there's a little bit of whataboutism in that case. And then, of course, the January 6th case and the former president's involvement in that case and essentially the events of January 6th, the riot on Capitol Hill. There are a lot of Republicans who still feel that he should not be held accountable in that case. So to me, those three have more complicating factors than the one in New York, which is a bit more straightforward and hits the public consciousness a little more straightforwardly.
I mean, I'm just listening to you rattle off all these cases. Of course, we know these are all going on, but Trump is set to become the first president in U.S. history to stand trial on criminal charges. What do you make of this situation the country has found itself in?
It's a bit shocking to the system, and any political expert who says they know what's going to happen from here on out simply is not telling the truth, because we are in a territory in which we've never had to navigate through. We've never seen two presumptive nominees for the presidency have such circumstances surround them. And of course, when we talk about the Republican nominee, it is a completely different ballgame. The current president is in nowhere the same universe as the former President Trump, because this is the only president in modern history. We have no comparison. You can't even draw a comparison to Nixon here. So constitutionally speaking, I think Republicans find themselves in a really tough predicament, and I believe we find ourselves closer to a brokered convention the minute that Trump sees a conviction.
That was NPR's Layla Fadel speaking with GOP strategist Rena Shah. This is The Metro.
That's right, Nick. This is The Metro. I'm Tia Graham. That is Nick Austin. Just taking a quick look at sports, actually. The Red Wings visit the Washington Capitals tonight. The Caps lead Detroit by 1 point in the race for the final wild card spot in the NHL's Eastern Conference. So we may see the Red Wings in the playoffs, fingers crossed. And the Detroit Tigers play their last spring training game against the Tampa Bay Rays. That happens today. That first pitch is set for 12:35. And the official season begins Thursday at the White Sox in Chicago. And that is a 4:10 first pitch. So definitely looking forward to some baseball. That means that warmer weather is here, finally. And thinking about warmer weather and getting into the groove of things, Ryan, what's up?
What a segue. I love it, Tia. We're getting ready for In the Groove here coming up at noon. We're going to highlight a lot of stuff from Yusef Days, this great drummer. He put out this record, Black Classical Music, that just goes absolutely hard. So we're going to weave that throughout the show today. And we'll dig into some Herbie Hancock, who's going to be coming to town later this week. He's going to be playing at Orchestra Hall. I've seen Herbie before. He's so amazing, even at his age, still pushing boundaries, still exploring new space. So really excited to have some Herbie Hancock on the show again, ahead of that show at Orchestra Hall later this week. That's all ahead on In the Groove. Thanks, Nick and Tia.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Looking forward to that, and looking forward to joining you on the Metro tomorrow. But that's been this show for March 26th. You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt, and our engineer is Nate Bender.
The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. If you like what you hear and want to support the Metro, consider becoming a member at WDET.org/donate.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow.